My New Jersey, life and family. If you asked anyone in the sleepy suburban sprawl of Stonebridge, New Jersey, what it was like to grow up there, they'd probably mention backyard barbecues, Friday night football, the clamor of gulls overhead, and the occasional power outage every hurricane season. But for me, Allison Walters, 24, stubborn as a brick, and only recently wise to the world, New Jersey was never that simple. I was born on a humid September evening, smack in the middle of hurricane season, in the small hospital just off Route 35. My mother, the kind of woman who wore sunflower prints and played piano on rainy days, didn't get much time with me. She passed away in a car accident when I was 9. I remember how the air in our house changed after that. Like someone had shut all the windows and nothing moved the same way anymore. My father, James Walters, was a tax attorney, disciplined, driven, and the proud owner of more briefcases than friends. He was never cruel, just distracted, shuffling from one meeting to another and answering my childhood questions with, "We'll talk later, Al." There was a stretch of years when it was just the two of us. I grew up on microwave dinners, in the scent of cologne lingering in the air after Dad left for work. Sometimes I felt like a supporting character in his impeccably ordered life. Then came Valerie. I remember the first time she walked in, tall, poised, expensive perfume wafting behind her like a wake. She was everything my mom wasn't. Sleek, sophisticated, effortlessly charming. The kind of woman who could silence a room by merely adjusting her silk scarf. She spoke to me softly, as though worried I might shatter. My father, who once seemed carved from granite, softened almost overnight around Valerie. Suddenly, our house, once filled with the soft static of TV reruns and the steady hum of laundry machines, was bursting with dinner parties, faux laughter, and the fragile harmony of blended family life. Valerie became my stepmother when I was 11, and if I'm being honest, she tried. At least, that's how it looked to everyone else. She enrolled me in tennis lessons I never asked for, bought me dresses in what she guessed were girl colors, and tried to extract confessions about typical teenage drama over herbal tea. But underneath all that effort, I sensed calculation. She'd pause a beat too long after I spoke. Always watching, always measuring. There was an edge to her questions, a purpose behind every shared moment. Looking back, I understand how isolated I felt in those early years. A stranger in my own house, where Dad seemed relieved to hand over every responsibility to Valerie, and the walls slowly closed in around me. I hid my grief in library books and journal pages, whispering memories of my mother to the empty afternoons. New Jersey is a place of second chances and unspoken histories. I suppose Valerie was my father's attempt at both. For me, though, she was the start of something else entirely, an uneasy new chapter, where family felt more like a chessboard than a home. Every day with Valerie taught me that survival sometimes meant biting my tongue, watching, and learning exactly what not to trust. I didn't know it then, but the lessons I drew from that uneasy quiet would shape every choice I'd make and every fight I'd someday win. Gloria's schemes. Gloria Mathers entered my life like a sudden storm, rattling everything I thought was secure. It started with little things, a suggestion here, a subtle push there. But her ambitions unfurled quickly once I started high school. Gloria was my stepmother for all legal and practical purposes, but calling her that never felt right. She was my father's second wife, and for me, the orchestrator behind everything that would soon spin out of my control. The first sign was how Gloria seemed to insert herself into every decision concerning my future. Choosing a college major, Gloria had lists, color-coded and research-backed, delivered with a smile I soon learned to fear. New friends I made in band or debate. Gloria would accidentally meet their parents at school functions, sizing them up with the sharp gaze she hid behind reading glasses. Each time I achieved something, a scholarship, a spot on a leadership board, Gloria was first to collect the paperwork, offering to keep it safe. I didn't realize until years later how she used these documents, flashing them to the right people at her dinner parties, weaving connections with the local elite who admired her dedicated stepdaughter's achievements. I should have questioned it when I found her reviewing my emails, or noticed how she always seemed to know where I was, who I was texting. I chalked it up to overprotectiveness, the residue of my own uncertainty. But it wasn't long before Gloria's influence locked tighter. Applications to colleges were double-checked and improved by her, sometimes submitted before I even saw them. Bank accounts for my summer jobs were opened and managed with her oversight. Awards, honor society pins, certificates, every artifact of my personal progress ended up in Gloria's elaborately organized home office. Behind closed doors, she courted the region's wealthier families. She used my grades, leadership positions, even my community service hours, as currency in a complex game of networking. "The Walters name will open doors for us all," she'd say. And my father, always busy, always absent, nodded in approval. It made me feel less like a daughter and more like a project she could market to boost her own social standing. Still, for a while, I went along, because arguing with Gloria was like swimming upstream. The more she tightened her grip, the smaller my world became. My passions, creative writing, jazz piano, were relegated to hobbies she called impractical. My dreams of choosing my own path seemed to disappear under Gloria's steady hand. My father, he was grateful not to be bothered and left every family matter to her. She played the long game, subtle but relentless, narrowing my choices until the future I wanted seemed barely visible. Only then did I start to question, would anything I achieved ever really belong to me? Or was I just another accessory in Gloria's carefully curated life? Doubts and longing for freedom. The moment I stepped onto the campus at Emerson College in Boston, I told myself, this will be different. Here, no one knows Gloria. No one collects my victories for family newsletters or spins my decisions into a pitch for climbing the social ladder. Yet, even with 100 miles between us, I couldn't quite shake her presence. It haunted me in the form of midnight text messages. Did you finish your essay for Econ 2101? I saw the syllabus online, and seemingly helpful emails, chock full of unsolicited advice. But I admit it, for a while, I played along. Years of Gloria's subtle pressure had trained me well. I kept folders of my college documents and routinely forwarded copies home, not questioning her requests for transcripts or financial aid letters. She always had a reason. I'm just keeping our records organized, sweetie. One day, you'll thank me for it. It wasn't until the middle of sophomore year that my doubts sharpened into something electric. The sense that I was being watched, maybe even managed. A classmate mentioned that my stepmother had contacted the university's financial aid office about a minor paperwork issue. It sounded innocuous, but it sent ice down my spine. I changed my passwords, started using cloud storage with two-factor authentication, and quietly requested a meeting with student services to double-check the contact information on file for my guardians. Then, one rainy night in October, I accidentally discovered the depth of Gloria's involvement. I had come home for fall break and found her alone in the kitchen, reading my unopened bank statement. She looked up, smooth as ever, and handed it to me. But I could see her notes scrawled in the margins: interest rates, spending patterns, remarks about excessive coffee shop charges. Somehow, she had gotten access to my online accounts too. I tried to argue, "That's mine. You have no right." But she waved me off, telling me, "This is just for your own good, Charlie. You'll thank me when you're older." That was the first time I realized how thoroughly she had woven herself into the infrastructure of my life. I was furious, but more than that, I was afraid. If she could peek into my finances and call my university, what else was she capable of? I started to keep a journal, documenting every oddity, emails I hadn't sent, but found in my inbox's sent folder, phone calls from bank representatives that I never authorized, forms pre-filled and returned with Gloria's precise, looping signature masquerading as my own. As my list grew, so did my desire to break free. I pictured a future where my decisions, where I lived, what I studied, even who I could love, would not be filtered through Gloria's lens. The vision grew sharper whenever she shut down my attempts at independence. Freshman year, I tried to study abroad. She forgot to submit my application, but told my father I'd lost interest. Sophomore year, I wanted to move off campus, but she convinced Dad it was unsafe for a girl my age. Then, when I took a part-time job writing articles for a local magazine, she recategorized the paperwork so my paychecks were deposited in the joint account she controlled. By junior year, I started investigating, quietly, like a detective in my own life. I reread university policies on consent and personal information. I set traps, applying for a library card and sending the confirmation to my home address to see if it disappeared. More often than not, it did. I borrowed a friend's phone to call my bank and confirm my account login history. There were attempts to change my email, none from me. Throughout all of this, my father remained unreachable. He never questioned why Gloria had so much access, always assuming she was helping the family. I wanted desperately to confront him, but timing and courage evaded me. I grew skilled at small rebellions: a secret savings account, a locked notebook, carefully coded phone conversations with trusted friends who became my confidants. I explored online forums about controlling family members, drawing comfort from strangers with stories like mine. Internally, the battle raged: guilt for distrusting my stepmother versus the sickening certainty that I had every right to defend my private life. I began practicing the hard words in the mirror, rehearsing what I would say if I ever faced Gloria with my suspicions. But instead of confrontation, I collected evidence, told myself to wait for the right moment, and tried to keep my grades up amid the turmoil. The final straw was an overheard midnight phone call. Home. For winter break, I couldn't sleep and went downstairs for water. The kitchen door was slightly ajar, and I heard Gloria's voice, chillingly calm, discussing consolidating assets and ensuring the inheritance is shielded from poor decisions. My name was mentioned in the same breath as trust fund access and long-term planning. My skin crawled at the realization. She wasn't just organizing my life. She was attempting to control my future entirely, for her benefit, not mine. I returned to school with resolve hardening in my chest. I began documenting rigorously, copying every email, saving every suspicious document, and writing daily entries about interactions with Gloria and my father. I met with a campus counselor, explained my situation, and was directed to a legal clinic for students. There, I learned the basics of my rights about information privacy, financial independence, and the steps I could take to protect myself. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that freedom was not just a daydream, but something worth fighting for. Each night, as I logged my findings, I pictured the day when the truth would come out, when I'd walk into my father's office, evidence in hand, and break the cycle. It would take all my courage. But for the first time since Gloria's schemes began, hope started to outweigh my fear. The day my patience ran out. When senior year arrived, I believed I had survived the worst of Gloria's interference. I was wrong. If anything, the final stretch before graduation sharpened her ambitions. Gloria's own fortunes took a dark turn when a real estate investment collapsed unexpectedly. Watching her unravel felt almost surreal. The always polished, always composed Gloria became nervous, snappish, and more controlling than ever. It was as if her grip on our family's systemic order was slipping, and she blamed me for the disorder. Every minor mistake, every late bill, every questionable withdrawal somehow wound up at my feet. My father, as always, was too distracted by his own work crisis to step in. The chill between us never felt icier. The week before finals, I came home to find Gloria surrounded by red folders and stacks of paper, pacing the living room as her Bluetooth earpiece blinked urgently. She barked orders at accountants and legal aides, her usual grace worn thin by desperation. Sensing an opportunity, I quietly set up my phone to record. That night, she called Valerie and blamed Allison's recklessness for family losses, complaining I was unfit to handle any responsibility. Fueled by anger and the sudden, undeniable urge to protect myself, I began quietly gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Boxes in the attic held thick files of my old tax forms, copies of checks written by Gloria in my name, and a shocking number of contracts and correspondence I'd never seen, but which bore my forged signature. I photographed everything. Each discovery was a punch in the gut, proof that my suspicions weren't paranoia. It all came to a head one Friday afternoon. Gloria had received notice of an official audit related to her failed investment. Panic set in. She stormed around the house in a fury and accused me, loudly, of sabotaging the family. My father looked up from his laptop for maybe the first time in a year, confusion clouding his face. I didn't run this time. I laid out what I'd gathered. Emails, forged documents, screenshots of unauthorized account access, even audio recordings of her candid late-night conversations. I explained how she'd used my credentials, forged paperwork, siphoned funds, all to maintain her web of control, putting her ambition above my autonomy and our family's well-being. My father fell silent. I glimpsed a flicker of old heartbreak and new guilt flickering in his eyes. He asked to see the documents, jaw clenched as he read Gloria's signed contracts and email trails. There were 12 years of trust unraveling in a single hour. Gloria's response was both fury and denial, each word more frantic than the last. When denial failed, she spun wild accusations about my ingratitude, the dangers of trusting a child with adult decisions. But as the evidence piled up, her voice shrank to desperate whispers, her usual composure replaced by panic. With every page I turned, I could almost feel old wounds closing inside me. My mother's absence, my father's distance, Valerie's cold calculations, finally riding out the storm that had hovered over my life for so long. By midnight, the decision was made. My father called the family lawyer. Gloria, stripped of any further control, packed her bags and left the next morning. Her reign was over. Valerie, usually a silent observer, offered nothing but a hollow, polite goodbye in the foyer before disappearing herself. In the quiet, the house felt different, emptier, but finally honest. For days, I floated between relief and exhaustion. I reclaimed the keys to my bank accounts, retrieved my personal records, and severed every official tie Gloria had used to bind me. Slowly, I learned to trust my own decisions again. I made mistakes, missed payment deadlines, bought the wrong insurance policy, got lost in bureaucratic paperwork. But each blunder belonged to me, and every victory was entirely my own. The hardest part was with my father. The silence between us was heavy, filled with unspoken regret and late-night conversations that never quite healed, but tried to repair what could be saved. I found small moments of pride in his attempts to learn, his incremental efforts to actually listen. But the greatest liberation was in finally owning my story. I began journaling again, not as the scared, lost child I had once been, but as the woman who had weathered the storm and drawn her own lines in the sand. The road ahead in Stonebridge looked open, wild, even hopeful. My patience had carried me through years of subtle wars. In a single week, it had delivered me the life I finally called my own. Facing the truth with my father, I never imagined that my turning point, the moment when the tangled web Gloria spun would finally snap, would take place in the dreary living room of my childhood home on such an ordinary Thursday night. There was no storm raging outside, but inside me, every nerve was supercharged with anticipation, fear, and a thin thread of hope that something, anything, would finally break free. All those months spent gathering proof, all the nights documenting small betrayals, all the suppressed anger and confusion, they were about to crash against the one person I'd avoided confronting the longest, my father. He had always seemed untouchable, a man who floated above the daily aches of our family, drowning himself in work and letting life ricochet off the custom shelves in his home office. My relationship with Dad had become a pattern. Short texts, polite conversations over dinner, and a careful detachment from anything outside of bills and birthdays. I used to resent him for it. Lately, I'd felt something heavier. The knowledge that his passivity had created the very space for Gloria's control to flourish. But now, I wasn't looking for an apology. I needed the truth to be seen, even if it shattered what little was left between us. I waited for the house to quiet, Gloria shut away in her room, tapping out frantic emails to lawyers, the smells of burned coffee and anxiety still hanging in the air. I slipped into Dad's office, a folder thick with evidence clutched in my hands. Bank statements, forged approvals, emails that should never have been sent from my account, contracts signed in handwriting that wasn't mine. My chest was tight. I didn't want a scene, but I wouldn't accept silence. He was hunched over his computer, half glasses perched on his nose, eyes red-rimmed and weary. He glanced up, irritation flickering into confusion, and then concern at whatever he must have seen in my face. I closed the door, my first small act of defiance. "Dad, we need to talk, and you need to listen." He said my name, voice mild but cautious, already on edge. "Is something wrong with your classes?" I shook my head and sat down across from him, my fingers drumming restlessly on the folder as I tried to figure out the least devastating place to start. "It's about Gloria, about everything she's done. With our family, with me, with my future. I have proof." He opened his mouth, some reflexive protest ready, but I opened the folder and began sliding pages toward him, each one a testament to years of invisible wounds. As he read, painfully slow, jaw tightening, shoulders lifting higher, something in the atmosphere shifted. It was as if, for the first time, A veil had been lifted. My hands shook, but I pushed on, narrating every step. How Gloria had tampered with my accounts, forged my name, redirected my academic and professional opportunities, isolated me from choices and people alike, and used everything she could for leverage and advancement in her own world. I explained how she'd manipulated him too, using his absence and distraction as cover. What started as disbelief on his face flickered through confusion, anger, hurt, then a deep, crushing shame. He didn't stop me. For the first time in my life, he just listened. As page after page landed on his desk, I felt a mix of dread and relief. No more hiding, no more pretending. His hand paused on a statement bearing my signature in Gloria's ornate handwriting. He swallowed, voice raw. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" That question stunned me. I thought of all the times I'd tried, all the tiny alarms I'd sounded in my teens, the quiet pleas for help that went unnoticed amid tax season or cross-country conference calls. Because you weren't here, Dad. And when you were, you trusted her more than you trusted me. His brows knit together in pain. He took off his glasses and pressed the heels of his hands to his eyes. God, Allison, I didn't know. I should have. I didn't let him finish. What matters is what you do now. My tone was sharper than I intended, but I didn't dare soften it. This moment had to land. I told him how my life had felt like a board game Gloria played by herself, how even my successes had been co-opted and spun for her benefit, how scared and small I had been, convinced I'd never matter enough to be saved. The silence in the room was thick, a palpable barrier neither of us could cross for a long beat. He read silently, absorbing the evidence, withdrawal slips, emails confirming meetings I'd never attended, letters of recommendation apparently drafted and sent without my knowledge, sanctimonious notes from Gloria requesting authority as my primary contact for everything from banking to school to medical emergencies. I watched his eyes dart over the figures. My summer earnings deposited and then transferred to dubious accounts. Legal documents granting Gloria powers I had never imagined existed. A timeline of control and gaslighting that, once laid bare, was impossible to ignore. Every so often he'd look to me for confirmation, but I only nodded, too tired for fresh tears. He tried, for a moment, to downplay her actions. Maybe she wanted what was best. Maybe she... But the sheer weight of my documentation, the cruel precision of Gloria's forgeries, snipped each excuse short. I recounted in detail the times she overrode my decisions, the night I found her reading my bank statements, the job offers gone missing, the invisible hand that blocked my independence over and over. I watched as realization gave way to horror. Did she get your trust fund? Has she spent it? He asked, barely above a whisper. Not all, I replied, voice shaky. But she was trying. Every major life event I had, college, first job, medical privacy, she found a way to monopolize. Dad, she controlled everything. The words hung between us, accusing, damning. He buried his face in his hands. I realized, with bittersweet clarity, that he was as much a casualty as I was. Blindsided, complicit by absence, and now facing the full, devastating truth. For years, my father had lived with a woman who manipulated us both, wearing devotion like a mask. In the pause that followed, I let him grieve. Then I drew a deep breath and pressed on. There's more. She's currently in the middle of an audit. She's used my name to cover part of her losses, and it's only a matter of time before the authorities ask for an explanation. I need you. I need you to stand with me this time, Dad. He finally raised his head, a strange mixture of fear, anger, and remorse shadowing his features. He reached for the evidence, again, stacking pages, reading and rereading, as if obsessed with finding some trace of a misunderstanding, a loophole he could crawl back through. But the truth was bulletproof. If there had ever been a doubt, it was erased now by Gloria's meticulous overreach, and by all that I'd survived to get here. "I didn't want to believe this," he said, his voice scraping over the words.
Thank you.
"But it's all here. I failed you." It hurt, hearing those words, even though I'd spent so long waiting for them. If he'd stopped me there, begged forgiveness, I might have crumbled, but he didn't. Instead, he squared his shoulders, reached for his phone, and began making the first of what would become a dozen calls to our lawyer, to the bank, even to the university's registrar, confirming my legitimate authority on every account. I watched him shift from regret to resolve. In another life, maybe this was the father I'd always needed, decisive, protective, present. Maybe this was the man my mother once loved. For the first time in so long, I saw him move for my sake, not out of obligation, but out of love. And it ached, but it was a good ache, a crack in the ice that had separated us for years. As the hours passed, the evidence I'd spent so long gathering became action. Our attorney confirmed the audit and advised that we reclaim all powers of attorney and notify authorities about the forged signatures. My father grew more determined with every step, barking instructions, forwarding emails, reminding Gloria in the firmest tone I'd ever heard that she was no longer in control. I stayed in the living room, ears pressed to the phone, coaching him through passwords, retrieval codes, old security questions only I could answer. The night blurred into morning. Gloria tried, once she realized what was happening, to intervene. But my father blocked her at every step. She denied everything, then raged, then wept, spinning half-truths and accusations. For the first time, he didn't yield. He shut the door on her theatrics, returning each time to me, asking for the truth, asking what I needed, and how he could help repair what had been broken. It was strange. I found the prospect of her defeat less triumphant than I'd imagined. I watched her unravel, her perfect facade cracking with every new revelation, each lie exposed in ink and memory. I realized that she had believed, right up until the end, that no one would ever believe me, that I'd always be the outnumbered child in the room. But there, under the sickly glow of the kitchen lamp, with my father finally awake and bearing witness, I was no longer voiceless. I expected confrontation, but not the strange silence that followed. It was as if our house itself breathed out, emptied of pretense. My father no longer looked through me, but saw me, really saw me. For maybe the first time since I was a little girl, exhaustion caught up with me. I curled up on the couch as dawn broke, letting the relief and the grief mingle. I'd longed for a reckoning. Yes, but it was bittersweet. Somewhere in the sadness, I also felt proud. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, files delivered to the authorities, locks changed, and legal documentation reestablished. Gloria was removed from every account, every contact list, every lever of family power. My father pressed charges with my blessing, and I decided Gloria didn't deserve more of my anguish. I stopped her final attempts at control by shutting down, stone-faced. She left soon after, bags packed, eyes wild and furious, forever shocked that her control had vanished. After Gloria's departure, the house took on an unfamiliar quiet. It was neither peaceful nor painful, just empty, a brand new space waiting to be filled by something honest for the first time in years. Dad and I began to
It's a
do the
pattern.
slow,
The
awkward
keywords
work
match.
of redefining ourselves. Not as absentee father and haunted daughter, not as survivors of someone else's ambitions, but as two people learning to trust again. Our conversations, once functional and brittle, started to thaw. We fumbled through apologies, memories, even jokes. When I asked him about Mom, my real mom, we traded old stories I'd never heard, photos I hadn't seen in a decade, dusty albums pulled from the attic as proof that my childhood hadn't always been haunted by suspicion and intrusion. I started making small choices only for myself, reapplying for the postgraduate programs I wanted, reestablishing separate bank accounts, claiming my transcripts. I learned how to navigate bureaucracy on my own terms. Missteps along the way, forms submitted late, bills forgotten, were mine to correct, not crises for someone else to weaponize. Each new trial felt like proof of freedom, even with the sting of responsibility. My relationship with my father took time, but it grew roots.
We know you were there that
He helped
night,
me
so start
file
talking.
paperwork and listened the first time I broke down from the stress of untangling my life. At night, I felt lighter, sometimes lonely, but unburdened. And beneath it all was a sense of vindication. So many years had been lost to fear and silence. But now, in the wake of confrontation, I understood that facing my father, laying down the evidence and forcing him to choose between illusion and truth, had been the bravest thing I'd ever done. I reclaimed not just my future, but my voice. And for the first time, Stonebridge, New Jersey, felt like it could truly be home, a place I had fought for, and finally, a place I could let myself belong. Reclaiming what's rightfully mine. If anyone had ever told me that the hardest part of survival wasn't the battles themselves, but the quiet aftermath, I might have believed them. And yet, nothing truly prepared me for what it meant to start over. Gloria's departure was not a single, thunderous event, but rather a slow unwinding, much like the unraveling of a sweater you've worn since childhood, and only now realize doesn't fit anymore. In the weeks and months that followed, I found myself picking up piece after piece of a life I barely remembered owning, each artifact oddly unfamiliar, and yet undeniably mine. As soon as the dust cleared, Gloria gone, my father newly present, and the house hauntingly quiet, I faced the daunting task of untangling the knots she'd left behind. There were financial accounts to reclaim, school records to correct, letters to write, explaining years of unauthorized communications sent under my name. The first time I walked into the Stonebridge branch of our local bank, alone and nervous, I hesitated at the glass doors, clutching my birth certificate, social security card, and a folder thick with evidence. The teller, perhaps used to far less dramatic customers, looked up at me with polite curiosity as I stammered out my story. I need to reset control over everything, I said, trying so hard not to sound desperate. The process was painstaking, made more difficult by the fact that for years, my presence had been a technicality. Gloria's authority was everywhere, on every account as a co-signer, on every notification as the primary contact, her handwriting disguised expertly as mine, on documents as varied as utility bills and medical authorizations. It took countless calls, hours waiting on hold, and more signatures than I thought possible to convince each institution that I was not a child to be protected, but an adult demanding her own ground. Some employees were sympathetic. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Others, coldly bureaucratic, their eyes glazing a little as I churned my way through the system's invisible labyrinth. Getting my school records untangled was even messier. Emerson had letters and permissions submitted on my behalf, some forging my consent, others simply rerouting notifications so I'd never see them. It took several stern, but polite, always polite, emails, 3 phone interviews, and a notarized statement to undo the web Gloria had spun around my academic progress. My academic advisor, a kindly woman named Dr. Priest, called me into her office one afternoon, files splayed across her desk like the aftermath of a paper explosion. "Allison, you had every grade, every transcript request intercepted," she asked, reading through the file. "How did you manage to stay on track with all this obstruction?" I shrugged, and in that moment, I realized I'd never felt prouder of my ability to adapt, to persist, to simply keep moving forward as the ground moved under my feet. The obstacles had become so familiar, I could almost admire them for the way they sharpened my stubbornness. I started to develop a little routine. Every morning, I made a list: accounts to change, people to call, gaps in my own memory, and agency to fill. Sometimes it felt like detective work, piecing together timelines and transactions, tracing a paper trail that rarely led where I expected. I found bank statements detailing minuscule overdraft fees for Starbucks runs I'd never made, and recurring donations to charities I'd never heard of, each one authorized by Gloria's elegant script. Sorting through it all gave me a peculiar sense of power, destructive and creative at once. The old me, the one coached to shrink, to yield, was gone. I was the architect now, and chaos was my building material. There were setbacks, of course. Not every door swung open just because I'd shown up with the right paperwork. Some employees interrogated me about the discrepancies. Others, hearing the urgency in my voice, worked quietly, sometimes even past closing time, to correct the records. I'll never forget the bank manager with the tired blue eyes, who paused mid-keystroke and said, "You're braver than you think, you know." It made something tight in my chest loosen, if only a little. Taking back my financial independence meant setting up new accounts, checking, savings, even a credit card of my own. For the first time, I monitored my balances, not out of fear, but with the thrill of actual ownership. I stumbled, made mistakes in budgeting, occasionally missed a payment, but each misstep was mine. The joint accounts, those silent proof of Gloria's quiet grip, were closed with ceremonious finality. In that small victory, I tasted freedom. Its flavor was equal parts fear and exhilaration. With paperwork in order, I turned to the house itself. Gloria had filled every corner with her presence. Scented candles, color-coded folders in the study, throw pillows monogrammed with her initials. I boxed each item up methodically, donating what I could, tossing the rest. The house looked unfamiliar bare, echoing with a new kind of emptiness. My father and I barely spoke those first weeks. He hovered at the edges of rooms, watching me reclaim the kitchen cabinets, the family calendar, even the mail slot that Gloria had once commandeered. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at an old photo of my mother, as if only now realizing how much had been lost. I understood then that real independence wasn't just legal or financial. It was emotional as well. I had to decide for myself how to rearrange this space, how to let laughter or music slip back in. Sometimes I played Mom's piano quietly in the evening, letting the unfinished chords drift up the stairs. Other nights, I sat with my journal open on the kitchen table, retracing every moment when I'd stayed silent, scripting new endings where I spoke my truth. By autumn, the worst of the administrative storm had passed. My professors addressed their emails to me, and only me. Job offers written in my own name finally arrived, and I started a part-time gig at a local publication, a job Gloria never would have chosen for me, but which made me feel alive. Even at work, telling my story to sympathetic coworkers drew a new boundary around my life. One Gloria could no longer cross. The little victories began to pile up. I set my own schedule for the first time, meticulously color coordinating a calendar. Not because I had to, but because it made sense to me. Sunday mornings used to belong to Gloria's elaborate brunch routines and chore checklists. Now, they were for sleeping in, going for runs, or getting lost in a book. On one chilly November morning, I drove out to Sandy Hook and walked along the shore, the salt air filling my lungs and making me feel more myself than I had in years. No one texted to check on me. No one demanded an itinerary. My time was my own. Despite my newfound autonomy, the sense of unease lingered. Trauma, I learned, does not evaporate. Even when its architect has left your life, I'd find myself hesitating before making decisions, second-guessing every purchase or agreement, scanning forms for invisible clause. Bit by bit, I brought these habits into the light, writing them down in my journal, talking them through with my therapist, and on occasion, with my father. He was trying, in his halting, awkward way, to rebuild trust. Sometimes he'd ask how my day went and really listen. Other nights he'd leave a note on my desk. Proud of you. Love, Dad. Reclaiming my mental space was more incremental than taking back a bank account. I celebrated minor milestones, applying to a leadership workshop without consulting anyone, planning a weekend trip to the city, signing a lease for my first off-campus apartment. There were losses, too. Friends whose loyalty turned out to be devotion to Gloria's social circle. Extended family who voiced confusion or even resentment that a good stepmother was getting such a harsh deal. These wounds stung. And sometimes, after a difficult phone call or a cold shoulder at a family event, I'd lock myself in my room and wonder if I had imagined it all. But the evidence, both physical and emotional, was undeniable. Gloria had built a kingdom on control, and I had spent years as its subject. Now, with every reclaimed document, every new password filed away, every moment spent alone by choice, I was laying claim to a different realm, one shaped by my desires, my values, and my voice. The most unexpected part of taking my life back was learning what I truly wanted. For so long, my goals were reactive. Get out of Gloria's shadow, prevent disaster, comply to avoid confrontation. But with the tyranny over, the shape of my ambitions slowly became my own. I spent whole afternoons experimenting, diving headfirst into creative writing classes, picking up volunteer work at the animal shelter, reconnecting with old friends I'd lost touch with during Gloria's reign. With every risk, even the small ones, like performing at open mic night or submitting an original poem to the school lit mag, I felt a little braver. Sometimes I still heard Gloria's voice in my ear, dismissive or doubting, but her power faded with every spontaneous decision, every unprefaced answer to the question, "What do you want to do next?" There was also a reckoning with the past. As I unpacked boxes buried in Gloria's office, I uncovered pieces of my childhood she'd tucked away, handwritten stories from third grade, photos of my mother and I at Sandy Hook, even old piano recital programs with my name circled in her careful script. The nostalgia was bittersweet, but also clarifying. So much of my life had been curated or rewritten by someone else. Now, I began to collect these mementos and arrange them in a scrapbook, not as evidence, but as a declaration. These are my memories, and no one gets to rewrite them but me. A particular moment stands out. My first birthday after Gloria was gone. My dad, still finding his footing, asked what kind of celebration I wanted. No assumptions, no plans made without me. We ordered takeout, watched bad movies, and for the first time in years, I laughed until I cried, without worrying how it might look. That night, alone in my room, I lit a single candle and wished for courage. Not to survive, but to thrive. I realized that freedom wasn't just about what I'd lost. It was about all that was possible now that I was free to choose. With freedom came new responsibility, but it never felt oppressive. I took ownership of my future with a sense of wonder and a long overdue confidence. When setbacks happened, the inevitable bureaucratic mistakes, the anxiety over new social situations, the moments of doubt, I let myself feel them, but I didn't spiral. Instead, every challenge was an opportunity to practice the autonomy I'd fought so fiercely to regain. I started building the foundations of a life that was entirely mine. I mapped out my post-graduation plans, sought out mentors who encouraged assertiveness, and celebrated personal victories, both big and small. There was a day, deep into winter, when I was offered my first staff writer position at a small magazine in Jersey City. I danced around my room, giddy and breathless, then called my dad, the real kind of call, spontaneous, where I wanted to share good news, not just report in. He sounded as proud as if I'd won a Pulitzer. We were both changing, my father and I. The rituals of old power grew less significant as we designed new ones together. Weekend breakfasts, shared walks in the park, stories about my mother told over black coffee. Sometimes the silence between us was awkward, but it was honest, and I learned to appreciate that more than any manufactured sense of harmony. Sometimes I wondered what became of Gloria, whether she regretted anything, or even noticed that the fortress she built had fallen. But most of the time, I let the question drift away, replaced by musings about classes, work deadlines, half-formed stories, and the endless possibility of the life I was finally crafting, one deliberate step at a time. Over time, the urgency I'd lived with for so long faded, replaced by a slower, deeper peace. No more did I jump at a phone notification or wince at the sight of a letter in Gloria's handwriting. The house grew warmer as seasons changed, a space for friends, for happy chaos, for failures and triumphs that were all my own. My father and I had become partners in recovery, witnesses to each other's slow, imperfect healing. One evening, after finishing a story I was proud of, I found myself reflecting on the stubborn hope that had carried me through. I remember journaling late at night, frantically documenting evidence, rehearsing speeches I thought I'd never have the nerve to give. I realized that my true inheritance wasn't the money or the accounts or even the legal vindication. It was the lesson, painful but transformative, that no one could claim my life if I refused to let them. Every act of reclaiming, each small assertion of independence, was a declaration. I am no longer a project for anyone else's ambition, but a person with the right to forge my own path. By the 1-year anniversary of Gloria's departure, everything about Stonebridge felt different. I celebrated quietly, planting sunflowers in the backyard, the flowers my mother loved best. I let the sunlight spill into the windows and played the piano she had once filled with effortless melodies. I lit a candle for those I lost and found joy in those I'd kept and in who I had become. I knew there would always be shadows, but now I faced them with eyes wide open and the promise to myself that I would never again be the passive character in someone else's story. A new chapter in my life. If I told you the hardest part of reclaiming my life was gathering evidence or confronting my father, I'd be lying. Those moments were painful and terrifying, but clear-cut, do or die, truth or silence. It wasn't until I stepped into the wide, echoing space of freedom, the aftermath, the promise of a life I truly owned, that I realized how much harder it is to build than to break away. The weeks after Gloria left blurred together with paperwork, awkward small talk with my father, and an almost physical aching for quiet. At first, every morning felt as if I'd stepped into a movie, set abandoned by its director. Lights still on, coffee growing cold, but no more lines to recite. For the first time in years, I got to decide what happened next. And that empty page was as thrilling as it was terrifying. I busied myself with the things that survival had pushed aside. My senior year at Emerson was now mine to finish, a victory in itself. I signed up for more creative writing workshops and started pausing at Boston's old bookstores on my way home from classes. There's a strange freedom in browsing for novels for no reason, in buying a poetry collection simply because it speaks to you. No one waiting at home to grill you about your taste or priorities. I met friends for coffee and didn't have to sneak back explanations or receipts. And for the first time on a Saturday, when I slept until noon and ate pancakes for lunch, I felt no guilt at all. Learning how to live unmonitored brought a strange, tentative joy. In the absence of control, I rediscovered the ordinariness of small happiness. Warm breakfasts, sunlight slanting through a window, the wild laughter of new friends in student housing. I even learned to enjoy making mistakes, missing a bill payment, burning dinner, finding myself stranded at the wrong bus stop. Each blunder was proof that I was finally the one steering this wild, unwritten ride. My relationship with my father entered new, vulnerable territory. We no longer tiptoed around each other's emotional landmines because the ground had already exploded. Sometimes, we still fell into old habits. He'd ask too many questions about my schedule, or I'd snap at a simple inquiry. But now, we repaired instead of retreating. I taught him to use online banking, and he taught me to grill steaks out back like my mother once did. On weekends, when we were both home, we'd play endless games of chess in the sunroom, quietly piecing together trust move by patient move. Independence, it turned out, had layers. There was the obvious: my restored legal authority, my new accounts, the fact that no one else read my mail or handled my documents. But the subtler freedom was learning to choose things simply because they made sense to me. When Emerson offered a spring break writing retreat in Vermont, I didn't ask anyone for permission or advice. I signed up. The trip brought me into the company of other writers, all strangers at first, but soon friends, people who knew nothing of Gloria or the scars she'd left. We sat around snowy fireplaces, trading stories, and I realized for the first time how much my life had become a story worth telling. Back in New Jersey, Stonebridge was both comfort and challenge. The familiar grocery aisles and winding streets, the old pier with the best sunrise view, these now belonged to me again, not as reminders of what I'd endured, but as proof of what I could reclaim. I started seeing familiar faces, people from high school or the family next door, not as witnesses to my past pain, but as neighbors in the present. There was a sort of gentle forgiveness in these everyday exchanges. A smile at the post office, a wave from a classmate, each one reaffirming that life continued long after the drama faded. Some wounds lingered. It was strange, almost anticlimactic, how the urge to look over my shoulder persisted weeks after Gloria's departure. I caught myself checking locks, monitoring my bank accounts obsessively, hesitating before filling out paperwork. Years of control are not easily shaken off. My therapist called it trauma residue, and I called it being careful. But either way, Every month that passed brought a little more ease. Life after survival isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's about living so that old fears lose their power. Emerson became the backdrop for my first true leap into adulthood. I moved into an off-campus apartment with 2 friends and filled my room with what truly mattered to me. Piles of books, Ingrid Michaelson vinyls, a battered upright piano. Dad helped me move from Stonebridge. I decorated my walls with old family photos and new postcards from friends, anchoring the present to a past I finally understood. For better or for worse, I began to trust my instincts, to choose my courses, decline invitations, or chase wild opportunities, because I wanted to, not because I was playing anyone else's long game. I reconnected with my mother's memory in novel ways. When I was a child, grief had made me hoard her piano music and hide in the corners of our old house. Now, I let those pieces back into my life, sometimes sitting at midnight, practicing the tunes she'd once played when rain lashed the windows. Dad would stop by the doorway, sometimes just to listen, sometimes with coffee or a remark about Mom's favorite song. Instead of feeling haunted, I felt accompanied by her. In my stubbornness, in the warmth I chose to offer others, in the laughter I finally let myself share. My circle of friends shifted too. Old alliances faded with the revelation that some people, especially those who'd hovered around us for Gloria's sake, were not truly interested in the girl behind the headlines. But others emerged, drawn not to my scars, but to the strange, hopeful force I was becoming. I joined the campus newspaper, pitching features about families and survival, about the power struggles no one talks about, but everyone survives in their own way. Sometimes my editors told me to be less personal, but the urge to tell my story, to speak for every daughter who ever outgrew someone else's shadow, was elemental. Over time, the victories became quieter and more sustaining than I'd imagined. There was the day I set up my own Roth IRA. The afternoon I turned down a job because it didn't feel right. The evening, I threw myself a small birthday party, without dreading who might critique my choice of cake or friends. I bought sunflowers for my desk, a tribute to my mother and to a new era. Even the uncertainties, anxieties about rent or career started to feel less like crises and more like normal growing pains. Every time I stumbled or doubted, I remembered the girl who'd fought for this freedom, and I refused to give up on her. My father, slowly, awkwardly, began to meet me on level ground. Sometimes he apologized for lost years, for believing convenience over confrontation, for the time he missed as I grew up in the shadow of someone else's ambition. I learned to accept his regret, not as a cure, but as a starting point. We let old habits die. He set boundaries with his work, made it home for dinner more often, listened, even when it was uncomfortable. One Sunday, we walked the beach at Sandy Hook together, wordless for a while, and I realized forgiveness had crept in, quietly, a byproduct of shared resolve, not forced reconciliation. I learned, too, that claiming your life doesn't mean erasing the past. Memories of Gloria still surfaced, sometimes in nightmares, sometimes as jokes among friends. May the ghosts of bad stepmothers stay gone. But I refused to let my identity be defined by the years she orchestrated. Instead, I told myself the truth. I was brave, resourceful, and worthy of happiness, not because of what I endured, but because of what I chose to become after. As graduation neared, I found myself filled with a new kind of excitement. My senior thesis, a collection of essays on memory and agency, was selected for a school prize. I had job interviews lined up, a tight-knit group of confidants, and, for the first time, Dreams not filtered through anyone else's anxieties. Dad offered to host a graduation party, but this time I helped plan every detail. We kept it simple: homemade food, laughter around the old dining table, music spilling from the living room, where, once, silence had ruled. The house in Stonebridge finally felt like a place of possibility. I took to gardening on weekends, planting flowers Mom loved along the fence, and tearing out the last reminders of Gloria's taste. The artificial boxwoods, the endless white hydrangeas. Dad started painting again. Landscapes of the ocean, woods, our backyard, each canvas brighter than the last. On one particularly bright afternoon, he turned to me with a smile I hadn't seen since childhood and said, "You've filled this place with hope again." I marked the anniversary of Gloria's exit, not with bitterness, but with ritual. Journaling beneath the sunflowers, calling the friends who had helped me through the worst, giving quiet thanks for the strength to keep choosing myself. It was a promise to never surrender my life to anyone's control. Not again. Even as I considered the future, graduate school, a year abroad, a home of my own, I knew I'd carry these hard-won boundaries everywhere I went. Each decision, big or small, was a tribute to me and to the girl who'd fought so fiercely for another chance. Now, when the sun sets over Stonebridge and light stretches through the kitchen, I find myself at the piano or with a pen in hand, sometimes alone, sometimes with Dad nearby. I'm haunted less by fear and more by gratitude for the freedom, for the peace, for the fierce, ordinary beauty of a life reclaimed and rebuilt. I know there will be setbacks, losses, and days when habit or old ghosts come calling. But I also know that resilience is less about erasing the past than honoring everything you survived, then stepping forward anyway. In time, the story of Gloria, of manipulation and survival, will become a single chapter, one among many, in the epic I'm writing for myself. When people speak of Stonebridge, they might remember the scandals or the strange, silent battles that played out behind suburban doors. But for me, the town has become a site of recovery, resilience, and renewal, a place where, with enough time and truth, you can begin again. I am Allison, no longer the product of someone else's ambition. I am the author of my own future. The last remnants of Gloria's control are faded memories, footnotes to a larger journey. I wake up most mornings with a stubborn faith in what's next. And when doubt creeps in, I open my journal, press a key on the piano, or plant another sunflower for tomorrow's promise. This is my new chapter. Imperfect, sometimes hard, always honest. The scars remind me of my strength. The dreams open wide before me. I survived, I reclaimed, and now, finally, I'm learning how to live.